After days of endless rumors and suffocating silence, Lena Hayes finally decided to speak. Not on social media, not in front of flashing cameras, but in a quiet room, sitting across from a journalist she trusted, someone who had known her long before the world learned her name. The recorder sat between them, small and ordinary, yet it felt heavier than anything Lena had ever faced. She took a slow breath, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I never wanted this," she began softly. "I never wanted attention, and I never wanted to be part of anyone's pain." Her voice was calm, but beneath it lived years of unspoken truth. "I met Keith a long time ago," Lena continued. "Before the rumors. Before the divorce. Before people started looking for someone to blame." She explained how she had worked behind the scenes on charity events and music projects, watching famous faces move through bright lights while real emotions stayed hidden in the shadows. "From the outside they looked perfect," she said. "Everyone believed that story. I did too at first." Lena paused, choosing her words carefully. "But perfection can be dangerous," she added. "Because when people believe you're perfect, they stop asking if you're okay." She described moments she had witnessed. Small, quiet moments the cameras never caught. Keith sitting alone backstage long after crowds left. His smile fading the second he thought no one was watching. The way he avoided conflict, choosing silence over arguments. "He was always trying to keep the peace," Lena said, "even when it cost him himself." When asked about Nicole, Lena didn't sound bitter. She didn't sound angry. If anything, she sounded tired. "I don't think she's evil," Lena said honestly. "I think she's human. And humans sometimes control what they fear losing." She spoke about tension, about pressure, about an image that had to be maintained at all costs. About how disagreements were buried instead of solved. How emotions were managed, not shared. "There were moments," Lena said quietly, "when Keith felt more like part of a brand than a husband." The journalist asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Did you witness something that changed everything?" Lena nodded slowly. "There was a night," she said, "during that charity event years ago. An argument behind closed doors. No yelling. No drama. Just words said with cold precision. She didn't repeat the words. She didn't need to. After that," Lena said, "I saw something in Keith's eyes I've never forgotten. The look of someone realizing they're alone, even when they're married." The room fell silent. "I stayed quiet for years," Lena continued, "because it wasn't my story to tell, and because I believed they might still find their way back to each other. But they didn't. And when the divorce happened," Lena said, "the world decided Keith was the villain. That he must have failed. That he must have chosen someone else." Her voice finally cracked. "That wasn't fair." Lena looked directly at the recorder. "I spoke because silence was hurting the wrong person," she said. "And because truth shouldn't belong only to those with the loudest voice." When the recording ended, Lena stood up, thanked the journalist, and walked out without looking back. Within hours, the interview was released. And nothing was the same again. The reaction was immediate. Social media erupted. Talk shows changed their schedules. Headlines shifted overnight. Lena Hayes speaks. The truth behind the silence. For the first time, the story wasn't about scandal. It was about emotional neglect, image, and what happens when love turns into obligation. People listened closely to Lena's words, not because they were shocking, but because they felt real. Fans began sharing their own stories. "I stayed quiet to keep peace. I smiled in public but cried alone. I lost myself trying to be perfect for someone else." Keith Urban still said nothing, but those close to him noticed a change. For the first time in years, he didn't look like a man hiding. He looked like someone finally breathing. Nicole, meanwhile, retreated from the spotlight. Interviews were canceled. Appearances postponed. When she did appear, her smile no longer looked effortless. It looked practiced. Insiders said she felt betrayed, not just by Lena, but by the idea that the world no longer saw her as untouchable. Because that was the real shift. The public wasn't turning against her. They were simply seeing her as human. And for someone who built everything on control and perfection, that loss felt unbearable. Weeks later, Keith released a song. No announcement. No promotion. Just a quiet upload. The lyrics spoke of distance, of trying, of loving someone who couldn't hear you anymore, of choosing silence until silence becomes permanent. Fans didn't need confirmation. They understood. Lena never spoke again. She didn't give follow-up interviews, didn't defend herself, didn't explain further. Her truth was already out there. And oddly, the chaos began to settle. Because the story was never about villains. It was about two people who loved each other but couldn't meet in the middle. About how fame amplifies cracks instead of hiding them. About how silence can protect, but it can also destroy. Months later, Keith was seen again in Nashville. Not with cameras. Not with headlines. Just walking, calm and unguarded. Nicole eventually returned to work too. Strong, composed, but changed. Less perfect. More real. And Lena. She went back to music. Back to quiet rooms and honest sound. She never wanted to be remembered as the woman who broke an illusion. Only as the one who finally told the truth. Because sometimes, the hardest stories aren't about betrayal. They're about what happens when love survives too long without being heard.